Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're going to explore something pretty interesting about diversity and inclusion efforts,
Okay.
but with like a bit of a twist.
All right.
We're going to be looking specifically at employees of Chinese descent in North America,
Interesting.
and we're going to be unpacking some research from Harvard Business Review
Okay.
that suggests that some D&I initiatives might actually be doing more harm
Ooh.
than good
How?
to the very people they're trying to help.
Yeah. That's a really important point. I think, we often talk about D&I as this universally positive thing,
Right.
but this research really challenges that assumption.
Yeah.
And highlights
Yeah.
that we need like a more nuanced approach.
For sure. So to kind of set the stage a little bit for everyone, this research focuses on a study of 250 East and Southeast Asian workers in the U.S. and Canada.
Right.
And I think what's really significant here is that the study was conducted in May 2020, right at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when anti-Asian sentiment was on the rise.
Right. Yeah. You can't separate the workplace from what's happening in society at large.
Exactly.
It's all connected. And this is where that context becomes so crucial.
Yeah.
The study found that half of these workers reported experiencing some form of mistreatment at work.
Half.
Yeah.
That's a huge number.
It is a staggering statistic, and it's all due to prejudice associated with the pandemic.
So can you give us a sense of what this mistreatment actually looked like?
Sure. It varied from person to person, of course.
Right.
But some of the examples that the study highlighted include things like social ostracism by colleagues.
Oh, wow.
You even had supervisors using really stigmatizing language.
Like what?
Like kung flu, that sort of thing. And then some workers even reported customers refusing them service.
Really?
Just based on their perceived ethnicity.
That's awful. I mean, that must have been so difficult to deal with.
Absolutely, especially during a time that was already so stressful and uncertain for everyone. And, it's important to remember, this kind of mistreatment doesn't just impact the individual.
Right.
It has ripple effects throughout the entire organization.
Of course. Yeah.
The study found that workers who experienced this kind of prejudice were more likely to feel burnt out.
Yeah.
Their performance suffered.
Makes sense.
And they were more likely to want to leave their jobs.
So where do D&I initiatives fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The study found that D&I initiatives were actually effective in reducing this mistreatment for many Asian workers.
So that's good news.
It is good news. But this positive effect did not extend to workers of Chinese descent.
Oh, so that's the twist.
That's the twist. Why did these initiatives work for some but not for others?
Right. That's the big question.
Exactly.
So let's break down these D&I initiatives into their core components.
Okay.
The researchers identified 3 key areas.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through them?
Certainly. So the first component is what they call equitable employment practices. Think of this as like the foundation of a truly inclusive workplace.
Got it.
It's about ensuring things like fair hiring and promotion processes, clear guidelines for reporting grievances, and mechanisms for addressing discrimination when it occurs.
Makes sense. So how did these equity-focused practices do in the study?
Well, they found that they were generally beneficial for all Asian workers, regardless of specific ethnicity.
Oh, good.
So this suggests that having these clear policies in place that promote fairness and address discrimination can have a real impact.
That's encouraging. All right, what's the second component?
The second component is the integration of differences.
Okay.
This is all about encouraging employees to bring their whole selves to work.
Right.
By sharing their cultural backgrounds, their experiences, their perspectives.
Yeah, this sounds great in theory.
Yeah, on the surface, it definitely sounds good.
Why wouldn't this be beneficial for everyone?
Well, that's the thing. The study actually found that in the context of May 2020, when there was so much negativity and fear surrounding China and its people, these practices actually ended up harming employees of Chinese descent.
Oh, so encouraging people to be themselves could backfire?
Unfortunately, in this specific context, it seems that way.
Can you elaborate on why that might be?
Sure. Well, imagine being encouraged to openly share your Chinese identity at a time when there's so much negative media coverage, misinformation, and even blatant racism directed at Chinese people.
Yeah, it's almost like you're being encouraged to stand out.
Exactly.
When it might feel safer to blend in.
Exactly. And this is where we see the importance of context.
For sure.
Encouraging authenticity is crucial, but it needs to be done thoughtfully and alongside other protective measures.
So it's not just one thing, it's a whole.
It's a multifaceted approach. This is where the study's recommendations come in. But before we jump into those, let's talk about that third component of D&I.
Okay. What is that third piece of the puzzle?
So the third component focuses on inclusion in decision-making. This means ensuring that people from diverse backgrounds have a voice in decisions that impact them and the organization as a whole.
Makes sense. So how did this factor into the study's findings?
This is interesting. They didn't actually find a direct correlation between inclusion in decision-making and a reduction in mistreatment during the pandemic.
Interesting. So why didn't it seem to have like an immediate impact?
Well, the researchers suggest it's because these initiatives often take time to implement. And for their effects to be felt. It's about laying the groundwork.
Gotcha. So it's more about long-term change.
Exactly. A more sustainable change. Even if the immediate benefits aren't as obvious.
Makes sense. But there's another layer to this that I found really fascinating.
Oh, tell me more.
The link between D&I and mental health.
Oh, that's so important.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that. What did they find?
Well, they pointed out that fear and uncertainty often lead to scapegoating. And during the pandemic, we saw this play out.
Huge rise in fear and uncertainty.
Exactly. Which unfortunately led to some people unfairly blaming those of Chinese descent.
Sadly, yes.
For the virus.
Right. When people are anxious, they often look for someone to blame.
So how does this relate back to D&I?
Well, if organizations are promoting a culture of openness and inclusivity, but they're failing to address the underlying anxieties that can fuel scapegoating, it creates a disconnect. It's not enough to just tell people to be themselves. You have to create a safe and supportive environment for them to do so.
So organizations need to take a more holistic approach to D&I.
Absolutely.
One that considers the mental health and well-being of their employees.
100%.
Alongside policies and practices.
It's about recognizing that true inclusion requires more than just words. It requires action, empathy, and a genuine commitment to creating a workplace where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued.
This has been so insightful.
It's a really important topic.
But I'm curious, what are some concrete steps that organizations can take to actually implement these recommendations?
Oh, yeah, that's the key question. What does this actually look like in practice? That's a great question. One of the most important things is strengthening their policies around harassment. And I mean, like, really strengthen them. It's not enough to just have these vague statements about treating everyone with respect. You need clear guidelines on what actually constitutes harassment. Including specific examples like using stigmatizing language or microaggressions.
How do you even address something like microaggressions?
That's a good point. It can be so subtle and often unintentional. That's where training comes in. You need to provide training on recognizing and addressing microaggressions.
So raising awareness.
Exactly. It's about helping people understand the impact of their words and actions. Even if they don't intend to cause harm.
So creating a culture of sensitivity.
A culture of awareness.
But policies and training alone can't solve everything, right?
No, of course not.
What about creating a culture where people actually feel comfortable speaking up?
That's crucial.
If they experience or witness harassment.
Right. You need to create that safe and supportive environment where people feel empowered to report incidents without fear of retaliation.
So it goes beyond just having a reporting mechanism.
100%. It's about fostering that culture where people feel believed and supported.
There's also the bystander effect.
Oh, the bystander effect is huge. The study found that a lot of these incidents occurred with bystanders present.
It's like nobody wants to get involved.
Right, and that points to a huge opportunity for allyship and bystander intervention training.
So empowering colleagues to actually step up?
And support each other.
We need to empower people to not be a bystander.
Right. It's not just about protecting yourself.
It's about looking out for each other. It's about creating that sense of collective responsibility.
And this kind of ties back to that third component we were discussing. Inclusion in decision-making.
Exactly.
You were saying it's crucial for long-term inclusion.
Yes. It's about laying the groundwork for a more inclusive future.
But how does that actually work in practice?
Well, it's about ensuring that people from diverse backgrounds have a seat at the table. when decisions are being made that affect them.
So like diversifying leadership teams.
That's one way.
Okay.
Creating employee resource groups and actively seeking out input from employees from underrepresented groups.
So giving people a voice.
Exactly. Making sure their perspectives are heard.
But you also mentioned the link between D&I and mental health.
Right. That's a critical piece of the puzzle. Yeah. So what can organizations do to address this?
Well, one of the most important things is acknowledging that these events can have a real impact on employees' mental health.
Yeah. Like, don't just pretend everything's fine.
Exactly. Don't sweep it under the rug.
Right.
Communicate openly and honestly.
Yeah.
Validate people's concerns.
Transparency and empathy.
So important.
Yeah.
For building trust and creating that sense of psychological safety.
What about more concrete support?
Well, organizations should definitely provide access to culturally competent mental health resources.
So things like counseling and support groups.
Yes, and I want to emphasize the importance of culturally competent here.
Right.
This means ensuring that the resources are tailored to the specific needs of different cultural groups.
So, for example, if you have a large number of Asian employees, it would be beneficial to offer resources that are sensitive to their specific cultural nuances.
Exactly. One size does not fit all when it comes to mental health support.
This all ties back to what you said earlier about the importance of context.
Yes.
D&I initiatives can't exist in a vacuum.
They need to be responsive to the specific challenges and needs
of different groups
and the wider social and political climate.
That's so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they need to be approached with empathy, a willingness to learn, and a commitment to ongoing evaluation and improvement.
This has been such an insightful conversation. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But I think it's clear that there's still so much more to learn and explore
100%.
when it comes to creating truly inclusive workplaces.
This deep dive really highlights the importance of moving beyond those simplistic solutions.
Yeah.
And engaging in a deeper understanding of the complexities involved.
Absolutely. So for our listeners who are eager to learn more about this research, where can they find the full article?
Sure, you can find it on hbr.org. The title is Research: Why Some D&I Efforts Failed Employees of Chinese Descent.
Okay.
And it's authored by Winnie Shen, Ivona Heidig, Janice Lamb, Christian Vardy, and Anja Kristic.
Perfect. We'll include a link in the show notes for everyone.
Great.
But before we wrap up, I want to kind of circle back to something you said earlier about the importance of context.
Right.
This study was conducted in May 2020 when anti-Asian sentiment was really high.
It was a very specific point in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how can organizations be more responsive to kind of like the current climate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's almost like organizations need to have their finger on the pulse, you know?
Right.
They need to have a sense of what's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And adjust their D&I efforts accordingly.
So like during times of heightened tension or prejudice towards a particular group?
It might mean taking those extra steps to ensure the safety and well-being of those employees.
What would that look like in practice?
Well, it could be things like increased security measures.
Okay.
Clear communication from leadership, condemning hate speech and discrimination, and making sure that support resources are readily available.
For those who experience it.
For those who experience it or even witness it.
It's also about recognizing that not every employee is going to feel comfortable, like, bringing their whole selves to work during those times.
Right. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, it's about creating that space where they feel safe and supported. Regardless of how they choose to navigate their identity.
And this ties back to what you were saying about fostering a culture of allyship?
Yes, where everyone feels empowered to speak up against injustice and to support their colleagues.
So things like bystander intervention training.
Exactly.
Creating safe spaces for dialogue.
Those are all really important.
When actively promoting inclusive behaviors.
Yes, it's about going beyond those individual actions and creating a collective sense of responsibility for inclusion.
And this kind of brings us full circle back to those research teams' recommendations about enhancing inclusion in decision-making.
Because when marginalized groups have a voice, it not only leads to better outcomes, but it also fosters a sense of belonging and empowerment.
And that's so important.
It's crucial for creating that sustainable culture of inclusion.
That goes beyond just like surface level initiatives.
Exactly. It's about embedding inclusion into the very fabric of the organization.
Yes. From policies and practices
to leadership behaviors,
to decision-making processes.
It's about creating that culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
This research has really challenged us to think critically.
It has.
About how we approach D&I.
And to recognize that one size does not fit all.
Exactly. What works for one group might not work for another.
And that's okay.
Yeah, it really underscores the importance of empathy.
Yeah.
Flexibility.
And a willingness to learn and listen to the experiences of others.
We've reached the end of our deep dive today.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of D&I.
My pleasure.
And its impact on employees of Chinese descent in North America.
A really important topic.
We hope this conversation has given you some new insights.
I hope so.
And maybe even inspired you to take action.
In your own workplace.
Your own workplaces.
Exactly.
Creating truly inclusive workplaces is a journey.
It's an ongoing process.
Not a destination.
It requires us to be mindful, intentional, and compassionate in our interactions with each other.
Let's continue to learn, grow, and work together.
To build a world where everyone feels a sense of belonging.
And can thrive.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.